So they've issued statements through spokespeople condemning things like the seizing of the building at Columbia, any kind of violence or anti-Semitic rhetoric. Of course, there's been pressure for Joe Biden himself to come out and address this, both from Jewish groups and from Republicans in Congress. It's a tough line, as you mentioned, Joe, for him to balance, though, because on one hand, he has these young voters who, it's not all young voters, but a very vocal segment who've been out there protesting his approach to the Israel-Hamas conflict. On the other hand, you have, Jewish Americans, a lot of other people who are very concerned about this. And so threading the needle and sort of putting out some kind of nuanced message is something very difficult right now. So it seems like the White House is hoping that the conflict resolves itself during these ceasefire talks this week, and that really takes a pin out of the protests we're seeing across college campuses.
Well, and it also is worth noting, Jordan, that a lot of this, frankly, is not actually in the hands of the president. It is up to these universities whether or not they're going to meet demands of students in terms of divesting from Israel, for example. And it's up to other parties, namely Israel and Hamas, as well as the Egyptians and Qataris, as to whether or not ultimately a ceasefire agreement is reached. There's only so much that the president is able to do.
That's right. And you make a good point, Kailey, which is that these protests aren't about Joe Biden, and they're not really even about the U.S. government. It's about what the universities are doing. And so whatever he says might not quell their concerns. And, the Biden campaign will tell you that while we're seeing a lot of protest activity, a lot of intense feeling, this is only a small sliver of not only the U.S. electorate, but of young voters. And young voters, while they support a ceasefire, they support the end to the war, they don't rank this too highly. So there's other issues like the economy where that's going to speak more to how they're casting their ballot in November than what we're seeing on televisions with the protests right now.
Is this his primary focus right now? When you look at Joe Biden's day, if you look at the length of time he can spend on an issue, we finally got through this whole funding process with Ukraine and Israel. We have funded the government. Obviously, he's got a campaign running. But when he's in the West Wing, is this occupying his full attention at the moment?
Absolutely. I mean, he said in public speeches that overseas conflicts, not just this, but Ukraine, that funding package you just mentioned, that's occupying the majority of his time. And it's interesting because we're in this election year. Usually you would see a presidential candidate out on the road, and you're seeing him out on the road, but a lot of his mental energy, a lot of the time spent behind closed doors is clearly spent on resolving this conflict. He's been on the phone with the leaders of Israel, of Arab nations who are helping broker these ceasefire talks, and it's clearly weighing heavily on his mind.